I think one of my favorite things about the internet is seeing the many opinions people have about almost anything, and I assume so do many others as well. But for me, I've always really enjoyed watching and reading video game reviews online. I love seeing how and why someone does or doesn't like a particular game. It's kind of the appeal of the internet, and has been going on for years, becoming more and more popular from places like forums, social medias, and even websites. And I think one website that does this the most interestingly is Metacritic. And I'm willing to bet a good chunk of my money that, well, at least what I have of it, that a lot of you here know what Metacritic is. But for those who don't, Metacritic is a video game review site that was made back in the far-off year of 2001. In its 19 years of existence, Metacritic has been able to stay as a relevant review site for gamers, gaming, and games, due to its unique feature of allowing both the professional critics and regular gamers to give their written thoughts as well as a numbered score on games. But since there are both plenty of critics and gamers out there giving their scores on games, nobody wants to sift through all of that. There's so many random scores. So what the website does is separates, adds, and averages the scores of the critics and gamers individually, or as the website calls them, critics and users. By doing this, the website is able to create a more general and consumable way of gauging the consensus on a video game. It's pretty simple, but I personally think that's just what makes Metacritic a cool website. A regular gamer gets to give their thoughts on a game alongside the well-trained critic in a simple and public format, whereas normally they'd have to go the extra mile and make a forum post or, I don't know, video essay. It's not often where we get to see the little guys have their opinions right alongside the big dogs, and I think that's neat. But we're talking about Metacritic, and oh god, it's far from perfect. Like, really far from perfect. Like, Jesus. Even though I've said that, I like the core appeal of Metacritic. There are just some unavoidable issues that come with that design, and it's necessary to address them. Quite infamously are the user review bombs, which is something that we still see to this day. Most of the time, these review bombs are caused in part by a huge controversy that surrounds the game, such as the game being leaked and revealing some poorly perceived aspects of the game, or the fans not getting exactly what they want. But this is really only done by those salty fans. There are also more meta aspects to the review bombs, such as it being revealed that the staff working on the game were subjected to poor working conditions, or the staff itself were made up of horrible people. Sometimes this mob of users review bombing a game can be well deserved, and at other times, it's really not. Most recently, we've seen this with The Last of Us Part 2 and that new Paper Mario game on Switch, but more so in the case of Last of Us 2. But I'm not here to focus on why Metacritic is, in all honesty, a little mediocre. Instead, I want to speculate and potentially answer, why are the Shin Megami Tensei / Megami Tensei games so commonly reviewed poorly by people on Metacritic? I know that most of my audience who are watching this video know what Megami Tensei is, or at least I hope so. If you're here, enjoy yourself. Got some other videos. But for you guys who don't know, it's a 30-year-old JRPG video game franchise based off of a book from the late 80s with a ton of spin-offs, each of which have their own unique mechanics that separates themselves from one another. Throughout its entire existence, Shin Megami Tensei has maintained a legacy for being a hard yet enjoyable series by JRPG fans and casuals. So it's kind of weird that a majority of the games in the series have such low user review scores, and most of the games that are seen as good in the series are just given bad or really bad Metacritic scores. But moving on, the hard yet enjoyable status is a very surface level understanding of Megami Tensei. There's just so much more to the appeal to the series than just that, and I think it's that appeal is what makes Megami Tensei's Metacritic scores really, really low. But moving on, the hard yet enjoyable status is a very surface level understanding of Megami Tensei. There's so much more to the series than just that, and I think that appeal might be why Shin Megami Tensei's Metacritic scores are so weird, or in other words, because of how particular the SMT series can be. The first idea that might come to your head was the one that we've spoken about previously, and was the first one that I had in mind while outlining the script. The user review bombs. Quick refresher, the review bombs are when a bunch of Metacritic users all give a game, or games, poor reviews in an attempt to lower its overall score and try to tank the game's performance and sales, or to try and send a message to the developers of the game for any number of reasons. Which is something I really haven't seen with the Megaten series aside from one really recent incident. If you've been on Megaten / Persona Twitter, You likely know what Break Free Persona is. It's pretty much a hashtag encouraging Atlus to port Persona 5 Royal as well as the other Persona titles to the Nintendo Switch. But in recent times, it's become infamous for being filled with really annoying and irksome people who comment under every single one of Atlus's posts to port Persona 5 Royal to Nintendo Switch. While it's okay to want to have a game come to your console of choice, it really gives the community a bad look if you're always nagging for Atlus to port their game. And it has. The hashtag even begun the admittedly funny, "don't" with us Persona 5 fans. We haven't even played the game meme to arise from it all. Getting to the point, it's given Persona fans a bad reputation as annoying port beggars who haven't even played the games they're begging for. We are now leading into the conspiracy theory zone, and the potential reason why Megaten Metacritic is such an oddity. We've spoken a pretty good deal about the Persona port beggars and their desires, which are to get Persona 5 and the other games in the series on Switch. Well, because of their wishes, some suspect that they're the reason Megami Tensei Metacritic scores are so low. Absolutely insane, you might say, and you're right. But let me explain. A few months earlier, back in July of 2020, Nintendo held a direct where they had their third-party devs present games for the Nintendo Switch, and at the end of the presentation was an announcement for Atlus's upcoming Shin Megami Tensei 5 and Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne HD Remaster. A lot of people who wanted Persona 5 Royal on the Switch were expecting just that when they saw the Atlus logo appear, and were very upset by the announcement of 2 Megami Tensei games and no Persona titles. After the announcement, it's suspected that the Persona 5 fans were motivated to go to every single Megami Tensei game's Metacritic and give them bad scores. This fits into the not giving the fans what they want type of review bomb. But even before I began to do this research part of the video, I had my doubts about this theory because 1, it's just super petty, and 2, there are tweets from 2019 that show that the Megaten series had low user scores long before the announcement, and 3 are the newer Persona games, which the port beggars are likely fans of, also have pretty low scores, and once again, it's just really petty to do this. At least, in this situation. Personally, I don't think that the user review bombs are the case, but even after researching it, I'm not ruling out that user review bombs didn't have some part of the low scores of the Megami Tensei games. I just think that what impact they did have was very minimal overall. However, if it's that elite group of Monkey Ball fans we're talking about, I have no doubts it's their fault, but there's not enough evidence to really say much there. But I've got my suspicions. Digging out of that rabbit hole and instead into the next point, I believe this one might be a strong contender for validating my earlier claim, and it has more to do with the game itself than just everything surrounding it. As I've said many times in this and my other videos, is that SMT is a series that is touted as being difficult yet rewarding, which I don't think is true. The games can be difficult, but it's less that they're difficult and more so that they have a steeper learning curve and demand more from the player, and are fun. For me, that's as recent as my experience with Devil Survivor on the DS. I've never played a strategy RPG before Desu, and not knowing how to strategize character movements on a grid all too well put my 3DS in the ER thanks to Belder. But like I said, it's not hard, the game just expects a lot out of you. That being said, just about every SMT game, mainline or spin-off, has a Belder. You know, that one boss that's really hard for being so early in the game, which I and the entire Megaten community tend to talk about. The 2 fights that maintain this status more than any other in the series are Matador and Minotaur. As anyone who's even slightly knowledgeable in the SMT community knows, is that these 2 early game fights can be a huge pain in the ass to players who don't come prepared, sometimes even being able to wipe your whole team out in a turn or 2. These 2 bosses have become one of the most discussed parts within the SMT community, and deservedly so. They're early game bosses that expect a lot more from the player than usual, which I like, but despite that, the fights still expect you to have a good understanding of buffs and debuffs, enemy exploitation and team composition, when the encounters happen less than 6 to 8 hours in the games. Because of how loose and offhanded these mechanics are introduced to the player, it's likely they might find themselves upset or even enraged if they are unable to pick up what the game wants, and might even leave a bad review. Yahweh knows that's what I felt spending the whole day on Belder, so I am clearly certified to talk in this area. Jokes aside, this is often normal. Everyone learns differently and finds one way of learning to be easier than another. When this happens, people who haven't been able to learn from the game's approach to teaching might end up dropping the game as a whole, because why play a game like this if every other fight is going to be like this if they just aren't able to pick up what the game is putting down? And to be honest, I think that might be why I'm not enjoying Devil Survivor as much as the other Megaten games, since I've never really played a strategy RPG and have not much of a clue as to what I'm doing. But I think I'll come around eventually. In the end, it all comes down to personal preference and what type of person you are. It's impossible that one thing will be a well-regarded and positive experience for everyone, and when it ends up being a negative one, it's more likely to have a visible impact than a positive one. But still, like any other theory, there are some issues that arise, such as how there are an abnormal amount of negative reviews on the game than there are positives. For example, Nocturne, a generally well-regarded game by the hardcore and casual community that for some reason has a strangely negative reception on Metacritic. Despite negative experiences having a lot more impact on people, the average definitely seems inorganically skewed in the negative direction. Like it was orchestrated or something. I'd expect the reviews to be somewhat mixed, but it's so low. But even though it's inorganic, I wouldn't say that this discredits the theory as a whole. It just looks a lot less structurally sound, if that makes sense. And I still think it somewhat supports the claim that I've made earlier. And now, on to the final point. So, how many of your friends actually know about Shin Megami Tensei? Go on. Tell me. I'm listening. Yeah, me too, man. Not many. SMT is a rather niche series. Well, I mean as niche as a series with over 30 years of history, with a soon-to-be sequel and remaster, tons of spin-offs, loads of merchandise, and over 12 million in sales can actually be. But despite that, no mainline SMT game has sold more than 1 million copies, which has already been achieved by its spin-off, the Persona series, which has done really well, just to put it simply. But as the saying goes, money isn't everything, and most series that have an extremely niche appeal tend to have the most loyal and passionate fan bases. But this begs the question, if it's not going to make money, then why make it? How's it going to sell? Alice is a business at the end of the day. Well, since Shin Megami Tensei does have a smaller than usual fan base, those a part of the community don't stay out of pity or obligation. They do so out of the ideas that it brings to the table that they aren't able to get from other games, and as such support the series more than they might do to others to get what they want. As I've gone and said before, not everyone is going to like one thing, despite how popular and well-regarded it might be. And it's because of that, there have to be concepts and designs that can only be loved by a small group of people. This is something we could see with the Megaten games. They're JRPGs with really odd yet compelling ideas that only people with very particular tastes are going to be able to appreciate. So when someone who's never given the series a chance tries a game, they might not like what the series does as much as other people do. Once again, people do have their preferences. Even Persona 5, which has sold better than any other game in the series and has the highest Metacritic score of all the Megami Tensei games, is still not liked by everyone, and yeah, it's just because people have their preferences. If I'm being honest, I kind of had some trouble writing the script of the video because anything I'd say here would sound too much like what Super Butterbun said in her video about Nocturne. As the butteriest of buns once said, Nocturne has its old school roots. It's punishing and demanding, but it's also different and interesting. No, the game is not for everyone, but that's kind of a good thing. Some games shouldn't strive to be all-pleasing and accessible because it eludes ideas that could be loved by neglected minorities, rather than just tolerated by the majority. Niches need to exist to keep ideas fresh, to create something weird and eventually over time perfected to the point where it becomes the new trendsetter. So basically, what I'm trying to say with this part of the video is that the SMT series has tried a lot of different things, some of which are loved by many, and others that aren't as loved, but still have their audience. Persona 5, which came many years after Persona 3, which came out many years after Persona 1 did, which spun off from SMT, took mechanics from each of them and kept experimenting until they found something that worked, something that appealed to a wider audience. They clearly succeeded with this. Persona 5 sold really well and has the highest Megami Tensei game score, but SMT Nocturne, which was the first mainline Megaten game in nearly a decade that shook up the formula so much and added many mechanics that are still a mainstay in the series to this day, ended up selling really poorly, but despite that, was still loved by those who did choose to give it a chance. So, when niches do exist, they're just, by definition, not going to be liked by everyone, and that's evident in the low user scores of the SMT Metacritics, and potentially why they might exist. There were gamers who wanted to take a chance with the game and ended up not liking what they played. It just wasn't for them. Once again, it all goes back to personal preference. We've seen this with as recent as Persona 5, which sold extremely well and once again has the highest score of any Megami Tensei game on Metacritic. I sound like a goddamn broken record at this point, but I'm not stopping. But despite that, it's still not liked by everyone, even though it has done well enough to resonate with the mainstream audience. Even when something is popular, people still have their preferences and aren't going to like it, so when something is more niche in particular, not as many people are bound to like it. And when people have their negative experiences, they're more inclined to make it known that they've had their negative experience. But this still brings up the same issue that we've spoken about previously, the inorganically skewed negative scores. Once again, SMT is generally perceived as being a pretty good series, so it's odd that there's such a large amount of negative reviews. Another thing that I also have issues with are the two newer Persona titles. They're arguably considered to be mainstream, having more or less the same structure and mechanics that Persona 5 has, yet they have considerably lower review scores, which, like the other Megaten titles spoken about today, are seen positively by the casual and hardcore community. So looking back on it all, did I actually saw why the Megami Tensei Metacritic is so negative? Personally, I think it's kinda the case. But it's not just any of the individual points, it's all of them. They all had some part in determining why the Megami Tensei Metacritic is so strange. I believe it just comes down to a mix of review bombs and genuinely negative reviews. Review bombings from the recent minor salty Persona fans, and the older Monkey Ball Elite shitposters, to the genuine users giving a game in the series a shot only to learn that they don't like what they've played and giving it a negative score. Even what I've spoken about is the case. This video is bound to be dated. So I'd say that you should take what I've discussed with a grain of salt. But even if this video does end up aging like doo-doo farts, I believe that the general points still have some weight and will still end up being valid if things change. And even if things do change, I have no doubt that someone's going to come across in this video and be like, hey, this video is shit, I'm going to make one better. But having said that, I'm going to end off on a positive note. This was a fun video to make. I've got something different planned for next time. Thanks for watching, stay tuned, and stay balling.